Since August 2017, Willem has been at the forefront of the strategic marketing initiatives at Lumileds, holding the position of Senior Director of Strategic Marketing. Residing in the San Francisco Bay Area, Willem's extensive experience and unparalleled knowledge of the lighting market have made him a respected figure in the industry. So thank you very much, Willem, for joining LPS Digital Expert Talks, and I want to hand over for your presentation.
Thank you, Siegfried. And I will start the presentation by actually going back in time. And if we think about where we were 15 years ago and pull back some of the headlines that we saw in the press about the lighting industry, there were actually quite a few concerns about this new technology, LED or light emitting diodes. There were concerns about whether LEDs had sufficient light output, whether they had good enough lifetime, and whether they were able to increase the desired efficiency of light fixtures. And this page just gives a few snapshots of headlines from those days. And the industry responded in various ways. We saw on the regulatory front, we saw the emergence of Energy Star, which governs a number of things. A DLC, Design Lights Consortium here in the United States with minimum efficiency requirements and regulating the accurate quantification of fixture performance. We saw LM80 and TM21 emerge as projections of lifetime and a standardized and unified way of quantifying lifetime of LEDs. Just as an example, we saw here in California numerous iterations of Title 21 and Title 24 regulating lighting equipment and lighting installations. And actually quite recently, we saw the European lighting regulation going into effect. And all these regulations, I think, had the aim to improve efficiency, stability, and output of LED-based lighting. And you would say that this is highly successful, and I think it has been very successful. However, unfortunately, that is not reflected in today's headlines. And here are a number of examples of what is in the news and how the lighting industry gets in the news today. And unfortunately, a lot of these headlines are not very positive and are not talking about us as the lighting industry in a positive way. So there's concerns about excess of light at night and how that impacts both humans and wildlife. There's concerns about how much blue is contained in the light and how that affects human health. And just these kind of headlines come out on a very regular basis these days. And it's not just in Europe that we see these headlines. We see them all over the globe. Here in the US, we see them on a regular basis, but also across Asia. There is a concern, I would say in general, with light pollution and how it impacts us. Example of a documentary that ran in Germany. This was about impact of light, and it was actually a lot of attention was given to insects, how light impacts insects at night, and insects being at the bottom of the food pyramid, how that affects other wildlife. And what I capture here on the right side is that this kind of press or this kind of documentaries gets picked up, and it's actually quite a lot of traffic and public interest in these kind of things. Here's an example of sky glow in San Francisco that was substantially increased when the fixtures that are shown in the bottom were installed. And this is actually a shot taken by a colleague of mine. So when this happened and when this installation went in, he consulted with the city and the people that installed these lights, and they made some adjustments in the aiming of the fixtures, and the impact on sky glow was quite dramatic. It's not just about the aiming and the direction of the fixtures. We can also ask ourselves whether the timing of light when it is on, and whether it's functional, and how we manage the optimum between function and potential downsides. In the US, we see states implementing light pollution laws. This is a recent snapshot of states that have implemented laws regulating light pollution. Recently in the press, there was news about Maui. They implemented, effective July 1st, a new lighting ordinance that actually regulates the amount of blue that can be contained in light. And they don't allow for new light installations to be more than 2% blue light. And blue in this case is defined as the content of light between 400 and 500 nanometers. This is an image from the Dark Sky Association. This is an association that is very active in creating awareness about the problem of light pollution. And they have a pretty simple recommendation around shielding of light. So on the left side, the worst is when light goes straight up. And by making less light going up and hitting a higher percentage of the light, the actually intended target surface, you move from a very bad situation to a much better situation. So when we look at the impacts of light at night, I think it's about shielding of light. So like in the previous image, making sure that it doesn't go into undesired directions. It's about managing the amount of blue that is contained in the light. It's about the timing when the light is on and when the lights are off, or the intensity that the light is and how that is managed over time. And the direction of the light. So is it illuminating a functional area? Is it functional illuminance, or is it non-functional illuminance? And if we look forward, I think in what I mentioned in the past, we have been very focused as a lighting industry on delivering high lux levels, delivering efficiency and longevity of light fixtures. But I think the new reality of the lighting industry is that besides these things, we also have to think about minimal environmental disruption. And that's what I will talk about more. But let me mention now also that as an industry, we have to think about, of course, about the reusability of our products. But as I mentioned, this talk and what we will talk about today is about minimal environmental disruption. And in this previous image, I showed it's about the direction of the light, the shielding of the light, the timing of the light, and the amount of blue of the light. And blue is related to the spectral content and the spectral distribution of the light emission, and that's where Lumileds as a lighting manufacturer and as an LED manufacturer can play a significant role. And that's where we will focus on next. So this is a chart that shows on the horizontal axis the wavelength going from 380 to 780. 380 is short wavelength. That's where blue light sits. And then 780 is long wavelength, and that's where deep red sit. And then in between blue and red, you have the different colors, green, yellow, etc. What you see here is a number of spectral distributions from different LEDs. So you see 4000 Kelvin in light blue, you see 3000 Kelvin in yellow. I show a couple of amber options. So there's PC amber, which is a relatively broad spectral distribution. And then you see direct amber, which is a relatively narrow distribution. And in green here is shown the photopic curve or eye response curve. This is used to quantify eye sensitivity to light. And you see that some sources have more blue light and other sources have more light in the red area of the spectrum. And next, showing here other eye response curves. So photopic, which is used as and sometimes interpreted as the daytime eye response. Melanopic is a eye response curve or a biological response curve that is often used to quantify circadian rhythm responses to light. Rhodopic is a response curve to which gives the rod sensitivity or dark light sensitivity that humans have. Now, it is important to highlight that these are human eye responses, and there's many eye responses that have been mapped out for different animal species, and they tend to be sometimes quite different from human eye responses, but I think the overall common denominator is that these eye responses have a sensitivity to blue and night for both humans and a lot of animal species. So let's take a look at, or before we go, let's think about incompatible or compatibility of trade-offs. So on the one hand, we like to have, for minimal environmental disruption, we'd like to have more yellow or amber kind of light with less blue content. And we also like to have it in low light levels. So amber at low levels gives us a low level of disruption. And that is shown here on the vertical axis. Actually, there's a lot of scientific studies that provide evidence for this, that light that meets these conditions provide low levels of disruption. On the other hand, there's a commonly accepted view that when lights are bright and when lights are, for example, 4,000 Kelvin or a little bit bluer, that promotes visibility and safety. For example, in traffic, but also in general safety and security. Now, what I want to highlight here, that this is a commonly accepted view, but when you try to find scientific papers that actually support this, the support doesn't seem to be so strong. So there's studies that compare different CCTs and visibility under different weather conditions. And there's some trend, but it doesn't overwhelmingly support that higher CCT creates better visibility. There's actually studies that from the early days of LEDs implementations that suggest that high pressure sodium, which is a more orange color light, provided as good visibility as 4,000 or 5,700 Kelvin LED light. So keeping that in mind, that high brightness, high CCT lights promotes visibility, that is a commonly accepted view, and that amber gives a low level of disruption, you might think that these are incompatible trade-offs. When we think about outdoor lighting as a tunable solution, we can imagine a light that maybe when there's a lot of traffic around is higher CCT and is brighter. And when things quiet down as night goes on, we tune the fixtures down and create amber, more amber color light. And in that way, multiple outcomes can be achieved. So the message that I want to give here is that it's not a choice of one versus the other. The technology is there to combine the best of both worlds. So now let's take a look at the percent of blue that is contained in a range of CCTs of LED sources. And the percent blue that we use here is defined as the amount of light between 400 and 500 nanometers divided by the total amount of light, radiometric emission from the light source. And in this case, you see the percentages of a range of CCTs. So you see 6500 having more than 30% of blue content. 3000 Kelvin is about 13%. And when you go all the way down to 1800 Kelvin, there's about 3% of blue contained in LED light. The other thing what you see in this chart is that whether you look at 70, 80, or 90 CRI, it all follows more or less the same trend. Now, we mentioned early in the talk this Hawaii specification, which aims to achieve less than 2% blue light. So let's see how different light sources perform to that. And what you see is that none of the LED sources between 1800 and 6500 Kelvin white meets this 2% light requirement. Even 1800 Kelvin exceeds that. But there's other LED sources like PC amber, red orange, or direct amber. They easily meet this less than 2% requirement. Now, we often think of incandescence and high pressure sodium as sources that contain very little blue. But what I highlight here is that there's actually about 7% even in those sources following this definition between 400 and 500 nanometer. Now, when we zoom in more on the low CCT side of the curve, we amplify the CCT axis here, and what you see here is again the percent blue of the white LED sources in the blue line. You see high pressure sodium and incandescent. You see some of the amber sources here on the left side of the scale. You also see a source called Nightscape, and this is a new technology Lumileds recently launched, and where we really had the aim of figuring out whether we can create a white light source that meets the 2% or less than 2% blue requirement, and still gives a good amount of a sort of low CCT white quality of light. And what you can see here is that this new source, which we call Nightscape, creates less than 2% blue and a substantially higher CCT than some of the white sources that cannot deliver less than 2% blue. So now let's take a little bit deeper into that less than 2% blue requirement and what options we have to meet. So first, when we look at standard white LED sources, for example, 3000 and 1800, they don't meet the requirement. So 13% and 2.9%, obviously more than the less than 2% blue. Then what we have seen people trying to meet this requirement using phosphor converted amber or PC amber, direct amber, but also using filters for 3000 Kelvin light and put an amber filter or yellow filter over a 3000 Kelvin light source. Now let's take a look at what's going on there. So they seem to be good in meeting the less than 2% blue requirement. When we look at efficiency, when we use a normalized efficiency to the 3000 Kelvin source, you see that there is a penalty for using PC amber and phosphor converted amber, and there's also a big penalty for using direct amber. There's somewhat of a penalty for filtered 3000 Kelvin light. When we look at lifetime requirements, PC amber has great longevity, but when we look at the typical LM80 files for direct amber, we see that there's compromises there. And when we think about filtering light, and especially filtering out the blue component of the light, I haven't been able to find any long-term life statements on these filters. So I think it is a bit of a question mark. In terms of CCT and white point, we capture the white point or the location of the white point relative to the black body locus, and we capture that in DUV. We see that PC amber is really not really a white light; it's an amber, and filtered at 3000 Kelvin. You have options using depending on the density of the filter, but you tend to get pretty far away from the black body locus. So the light tends to be very yellowish or a little bit of greenish in its tint. In terms of CRI, these different options have CRIs of around 55. Amber has very low color rendering. Maybe it's better to go straight to these charts at the bottom, which is a TM30 color vector diagram, where you see the comparison between PC amber, and filtered 3000 Kelvin. And you see that even filtered 3000 Kelvin is a substantial step back from PC amber. Now, this is the starting point where we started the development of the Nightscape technology. Our aim was to provide a color point that is close to the black body line, that has as high a CCT as possible, or a pleasant quality of light that is possible, that provides less than 2% blue, and has the highest possible efficiency. You see that in these various areas, this Nightscape technology scores nicely. And what is also important is that we tested numerous variants on customers, and interestingly, the customer preference seems to be for this CRI of close to 50 over versions that we tried out and had a CRI of close to 70. So you can make this technology with 70 CRI. In general, the preference seems to be for the lower CRI version. The benefit also of the lower CRI version is that the efficiency is substantially higher. So this image actually gives a pretty good representation of the color point that we get with Nightscape, and you see the spectral power distribution. Summarizing, and this is the last slide of my presentation, is that I think we have to recognize as a lighting industry that end users ask us to think about the impact of our products at night. As I mentioned, there's general concerns in the general public, and we think those can be translated into actions. As an LED manufacturer, we can address especially the spectral power distribution of the products, and instead of people using, for example, filters or other things, trying to work with existing LED flavors, we think we can make a great contribution to basically start from a white sheet of paper, look at the end user concerns, and come up with solutions that address those concerns. And in the end, there's two ways of looking at concerns and complaints. One is to consider them a nuisance. Our view is actually that they're a great opportunity for the industry. So my proposal is to conclude this talk with, let's listen carefully to concerns that end users have with our product, and let's try to address those, and let's collaborate and create a better end user experience.
Willem, thank you very much for your presentation. It was interesting to see this new launch of Nightscape technology and what's behind that.